Before you start telling me that I need to spend more money on security, don't bother. We already use strong passwords and all of our accounts have got MFA enabled.
Okay, but what is your business doing to protect itself against token theft?
Token theft? What's that?
Well, it means that cybercriminals can get access to your Microsoft 365 data even when you've got MFA enabled.
I didn't know that. Well, you better tell me more about this token theft, and more importantly, how can I protect my business against it?
Okay, I will. But first, an introduction. My name is Jonathan Edwards, also known as the Bearded 365 Guy. I help businesses all over the world with a Microsoft 365. You can find more information at bearded365guy.com. More and more of us are using MFA to protect our Microsoft 365. But guess what? The bad guys are catching up. They're finding new ways to hack into our systems. And one of the newest ways is called token theft. Now, token theft is on the rise. Last year, it went up by 111%. So it's important that businesses have adequate protection in place. So what is token theft? Well, let's go back to when we were kids. The fairground would roll into town. It was so exciting. We'd queue at the ticket office for hours, and finally, we'd get a ticket. We'd show that ticket to the security guard, and we'd be in to the fairground. They had the waltzers, the roller coaster, and Hook the Duck. Now, strangely enough, this is a little bit like logging into Microsoft 365. Consider the fairground to be our Microsoft 365, and the various rides in the fairground are our Microsoft 365 services, like Outlook, Teams, SharePoint, and OneDrive. And do you know when we bought our ticket to the fairground? Well, this is like logging on to Microsoft 365, entering a username, password, and MFA. But what would happen if after we bought our ticket, some bad person slipped the ticket out of our pocket, copied it, and then put it back in our pocket? They'd also be able to get into the fairground and ride on all the rides. This is token theft. When we log on to our Microsoft 365 with our username, password, and MFA, a token is created and stored on our device. What cybercriminals are now doing is copying that token, which allows them to log into our Microsoft 365 apps and services without entering any credentials. Think about this for a minute. Cybercriminals are playing Hook the Duck in your Outlook. They're riding the teacups in your SharePoint. They're playing on the Ferris wheel in your OneDrive. Now, you might be asking, how are they stealing my token? Well, there's a number of different ways, but most commonly, it's with phishing emails. They're sending us emails with dodgy links. When we click on that link, it's installing some malicious software on our PCs, which enables them to steal the token. And we probably don't even realize they've done it.
Oh, these cybercriminals. They're very clever, aren't they? Tell me, how can I protect my business against token theft?
Well, Fred, what Microsoft 365 license do you use?
We use Microsoft 365 Business Premium.
Right, okay, I'll start by telling you the strategies that you can implement with the services available within Microsoft 365 Business Premium. There are a couple of other strategies that you can use, but it requires you to spend money on more licenses. More on that later. Firstly, it goes without saying that you've got to have good cyber hygiene. If we do that, we can limit the chances of the tokens being stolen in the first place. When I talk about decent cyber hygiene, I'm talking about things like good endpoint security on all your devices, something like Defender for Business. I'm also talking about protecting our email with a good security software. Things like Defender for Office 365. Both Defender for Business and Defender for Office 365 are in the Microsoft 365 Business Premium license. Oh, and it's important that none of your users have full admin access to their computers. Make sure they've got standard accounts. Secondly, one of the most recommended ways to help prevent token theft is to make sure that only devices which are owned and managed by your company and registered in Microsoft Intune can access your Microsoft 365 data. Now, to do this, you create something called conditional access policies. Let me show you exactly what I mean. Okay, I'm logged into the Microsoft 365 Admin Center as a global admin. The first thing I want to do is go down to Admin Centers and Identity. Once we're in there, I'm going to go to Protection and Conditional Access. Now, this is just a test tenancy. What I'm going to do here is create a new policy. And the first thing you've got to do is give your policy a name. So let's give it this. Something like this, ensure device compliance. Then we've got to select the users we want this policy to apply to. Usually we would just select all users, but you might have certain users and groups that you want to apply this policy to. I will select all users and I will exclude this account that I'm currently using. Okay, select there, click on select. Okay. We're happy with that. Then target resources. So we want to apply it to all resources, which was formerly all cloud apps. And then we've got some conditions. So if I just leave this as it is, it's applying to all locations. It's applying to all device platforms. You might want to look at the device platforms because if we leave it like this, it will apply to all devices. So if people have got iPhones and things like that, you might want to just tame it down and say, well, I'm going to point this at just Windows devices. I'm not going to in this because this is just a demo. So I'll come out of there. And then what we'll do is we will go down to grant control here and we will grant access to our Microsoft 365 resources, but we will require the device to be marked as compliant. So this means if the device isn't in Intune and isn't compliant, it won't be able to access our Microsoft 365 resources. So again, if someone takes the token and has it in their environment on a PC that isn't part of our Intune, they won't be able to access our resources. Now, just a little bit more about device compliance. We can extend this if we just go to the 365 Admin Center, and this time we go to Microsoft Intune, and then into Endpoint Security. You can see down here, there's a section called Device Compliance. So what we can do, as I said, this is just a test tenancy, so I've got no compliance policies. But I can create my own bespoke compliance policy. So to do that, I will go to here. I would select the platform, which would be Windows 10 or later, and click on Create. I'd then give this a name, something like that, and then click on Next. And then you can see I've got a number of options. So I can almost build my own compliance policy for Windows 10 and Windows 11 devices. Just an example, let's click on System Security. So for example, I can insist that all devices in my business have a firewall, TPM chip, antivirus, anti-spyware, okay? So rather than the device just being in Intune, I can stipulate that it needs to be a minimum security level. Things like device health, I can insist that it's got BitLocker enabled. I can also insist that it's got a minimum version of Windows. So you can build that compliance policy out. And then you've got various options for non-compliance. So if a device falls out of that, so if the device has an old version of Windows, if the device suddenly doesn't have the firewall switched on, we can send emails to end users, or we can actually retire the device. So that's just extending the compliance policies. But back to my conditional access policy. Once we're happy with this, we can click on select. We can then switch that policy on and we can click on create. And what we've now done is we've restricted access to our Microsoft 365 apps and data to just devices that are managed and are in Intune. Okay, that's a really good start. But what other strategies can we utilize with the services that are included in Microsoft 365 Business Premium? Well, we can do something really clever with locations. Now, out of the box, you can access your Microsoft 365 data and applications from anywhere in the world. This is incredibly convenient for us. But when it comes to cybercriminals and token theft, it's a bit of a risk because they can use the tokens anywhere in the world. Now, what we can implement in Microsoft 365 is something called approved locations. Now, these locations can be countries, they can be IP addresses. But these approved locations is what we can use to make sure that we can access our Microsoft 365 data only from these approved locations and nowhere else. Now, this can be tricky to set up just because of the way we work today. In the good old days, we'd all have an office and that would be easy. But today, we're working from everywhere. Having said that, there are lots of different solutions that you can implement to make sure that people are always working from approved locations. But what I'm going to show you now is a policy that we can create to help combat token theft. And that is if a token is used anywhere else but an approved location, it won't work. Let me show you how. Okay, so we're back in the Entra Admin Center and we're in conditional access. Now, before I show you this, I must issue a word of warning. This is one of these policies that if you don't do it correctly, you're going to end up locking people out, and that's not what you want. So my recommendation, as with all policies, but specifically with this one, test it on a very small number of end users. Look at the logs, test again, add more users. Don't just implement this policy as a blanket across your organization, because if you do, you might run into a bit of trouble. Okay, so lecture over. So the first thing we need to do is go to manage and named locations. So this is where we can add all our locations that we can then use in conditional access policies. So along the top, we can add countries in there, but what I'm going to focus on is IP ranges location. Now, what you would do is enter a name, something like this. Okay, head office. You'd mark that as a trusted location. And then in here, you would add the IP range. So I'll just add an IP range now, and then you click on add, and then you click on create. And there you can see I've got the IP range of my head office, and you can see that it's not configured in any policies just yet. So then I head over and I create my conditional access policy. I will create a new policy. So first of all, we give it a name. So I'll type one in here now, something like that. And then we move on to who we're applying this policy to. Again, just to repeat my warning from before, don't just blanket it to all users to start with. Create some groups and apply it to small groups like that. But for my demo, I will say all users. Then we go on to target resources, and we want all resources. And then in the network, so we want to configure this. And then we can select the network and locations that we're going to use. And you can see that our head office has appeared here. Now, if you've done this correctly, you've probably got lots and lots of IP ranges. You might have different locations. And what you can do is choose these in here. I've just got one, so I'm going to choose the head office there. And then we go to access controls. So again, if you've got no policies, we're going to grant access. But if you've got no policies in your tenant about MFA, I urge you to choose one here. Maybe choose the require authentication strength. Again, I've got videos on my channel about that. I'll just leave it at that for now. Onto the session control. Sorry, I didn't select that. Onto the session control. And it's this here, customize continuous access evaluation. And it tells you a little bit more about continuous access evaluation. So I'm going to click on there, and I want to strictly enforce location policies. I would switch that policy on, and I will create that conditional access policy. Okay, there's some options that you can use with Microsoft 365 Business Premium. I did mention earlier in the video that you've got some more options, but you have to pay for a license. Now, Microsoft 365 Business Premium comes with something called Entra ID P1. If you buy Entra ID P2, you get some more features which can help you combat token theft. Now, Entra ID P2 is £6.90 per user per month. It's also included in a product called Entra ID Suite, which is £9.60 per user per month. But it does have lots of features to enhance your security. I'll be doing a video all about this in a couple of weeks' time. Now, the next feature. Let's go back to our fairground analogy once again. Imagine when we bought our ticket to the fairground that we also had our photograph printed on the ticket. Imagine if we had our name added to the ticket and then that ticket got copied. What would happen when that cybercriminal went to the security guard with the copied ticket? Well, there's another conditional access policy that we can create called token protection. What happens is we log into Microsoft 365 with our username, password, and MFA, and the token that is created is tied to our device. So even if it was stolen, it wouldn't be able to be used anywhere else. Let me show you how to do that. So click on Create New Policy, and then I need to create a name for this policy. So I'll call it this, Token Protection. It does what it says on the tin. And then which users are we targeting with this new policy? Well, I'm going to create all users. You might want to exclude certain users or groups, but in my example, I'm targeting all users. And then which resources are we targeting? Well, token protection at the moment only works with Exchange, SharePoint, and Teams. So I can't choose all resources. If I do, an option down here will be grayed out. So I'm going to click on Select Resources and then click on Select. In this search box at the top, I can just type the word Office, and then from here, choose Office 365 Exchange Online and Office 365 SharePoint Online. Click on Select, and then we need to go to Conditions. So again, as I mentioned previously, this only works with Windows devices at the moment. So I'm going to turn this on, and then I'm going to select Device Platforms and target this at my Windows devices. Something else I'm going to do, I'm going to go to Client Apps, I'm going to configure this, and I'm going to deselect everything apart from mobile apps and desktop clients. Click on Done. And the final bit is to go down to Session and choose this one here. Require token protection for sign-in sessions, and it's still in preview. And it just confirms here that at the moment it works with only supported devices and applications. Click on Select, switch this on, and our new token protection conditional access policy has been created. Okay, the last feature. Now, as soon as you've just bought Entra ID P2, there's another feature in there that can help protect you against token theft. Now, imagine for a moment that Microsoft is monitoring all of our users all of the time. Microsoft is monitoring each time a user signs in to Microsoft 365. It's monitoring our user accounts. Well, there's a feature called risk-based conditional access, and essentially, Microsoft are monitoring all our users and sign-ins. For example, Microsoft will monitor if a user logs in Leeds in the UK. But what if that same user, 5 minutes later, logs in America? I mean, what other? Supersonic? What Microsoft can then do is flag this user as a risky user, and it can again prompt that user for MFA. Now, this is really good security. I'm going to tell you more about it right away. Okay, so what we're going to do here is create a couple of conditional access policies. So again, we go to Protection and we go to Conditional Access. Now, what's happening with the Entra ID Protection Suite is Microsoft is continually monitoring all the signings. If I just go to this page here, you can see some of the things that Microsoft are monitoring for. Things like anonymous IP addresses, impossible travel, sign-ins from infected devices, unfamiliar locations. So Microsoft are doing that on our behalf. So what we're going to do first is we're going to create a sign-in risk policy, okay? What we're going to do, if Microsoft detects that it's suspicious, we're going to make the user enter their MFA details once again, okay? So we go to Conditional Access, we create a policy, we give that policy a name. Something like that, or call it whatever you need. We're going to apply this to all users. We're going to target this at all resources. And then we're going to go down to conditions here. And you can see here, look, there's a sign-in risk. At the moment, it's not configured. So we want to configure it. And we want to say if Microsoft consider the risk high or medium, we want to act. Okay, so click on Done. Okay, next we go down to Grant. And what we're going to say is we're going to grant access, but we need multi-factor authentication. So whenever Microsoft detects that this is risky, we are going to grant access, but we require multi-factor authentication again. Oh, just cancel that, click on select. And also in the session here, we're going to say sign-in frequency every time. Okay, so every time Microsoft suspects this, we're going to prompt for MFA. We're going to click on select. I will exclude my user from this and I will switch it on. Okay, so that policy is now in place. I'm going to create a new policy. Okay, create a new policy, and I'm going to give this one a name as well. This one is called user risk policy. So you might be saying, what is the difference between sign-in risk policy and user risk policy? When it comes to user risk policy, Microsoft are getting a lot of different information from different places, and they believe that the user is at risk. Okay, their credentials might have been leaked, their account might have been compromised. The sign-in risk is just that particular sign-on. Okay, so if someone's signed on from a different country, and it's impossible that they've got there in that time, that would be a sign-in risk. Okay, so the subtle differences there. Again, we're going to target all users, and again, we're going to target all resources. This time in conditions, we're going to go to user risk. Okay, and we're going to put these again. If Microsoft think this is high or medium, we want it to act. Click on done, and then we're going to go to here, grant access. And there's a couple of things we can do here. We've got this option here. So we can require MFA, and we can also require the user to change their password. Okay, click on select. Again, we'll exclude, and again, we can switch that policy on. So now we've got Microsoft monitoring sign-ins and our user risk, and that will help with our token protection. Okay, I really hope you've enjoyed today's video. It's all about protecting your business from token theft. I look forward to seeing you again next week.